Hello.
Oh,
Welcome to the channel. This is my cousin, Sam Stratton, Dr. Sam Stratton, and he is a professor at UCLA Med. Is that correct, Sammy?
yeah, I actually am at the UCLA School of Public Health, but for 30 years I had a dual appointment with the UCLA. It's called Geffen School of Medicine, um, and retired clinically a few years ago and just continued teaching public health.
So, how did you ever start in on it? I know for a long time you were a practicing emergency room doctor. Is that right?
Yeah, for a number of years, I worked in a hospital in Long Beach, St. Mary's Medical Center, and it's a obviously a religious hospital, although I'm far from religious. Um, and with the UCLA system would rotate emergency medicine residents, so they're in training. They've already got their doctorate or their MD degree, but they're training to be emergency medicine residents. So they would rotate one or two every 3 or 4 months with us in a real ER, not an academic one. And I when they were when I had them around, I found it really interesting to teach and more enjoyable than just, you know, getting everything else done and whatever. So after a while, I was offered an appointment, faculty appointment at the School of Medicine at UCLA. And I'm still baffled as to why I was offered that. But the uh, director of the emergency department uh, and the director of the medicine department basically got in touch with me and said, "Would you be interested in teaching?" And I basically said yes before I realized that I would be taking a 50% cut in pay.
Ooh, ow, ouchie.
Oh, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Um,
Well, you come from a family of teachers. We're all kind of mad monks in a way, you
oh,
know.
yes, yes. And it turned out the benefits, retirement plan, and everything, health insurance made up for it. But yeah, it was a dramatic change to go to teaching, but it worked well. Um, and I really enjoyed it. So my whole teaching, it's not like high school or K through 12. It's always been people. I'm working and teaching people that would be considered graduate students.
Right.
Or now at UCLA, I have undergraduate students also that I teach, and so it became really enjoyable. I actually preferred it to making lots of money and well whatever. Very comfortable. And
Right.
I guess the thing that's odd is that, as with my mother, who was a fifth grade teacher, and a lot of other members in our family, the teaching just seemed to be natural and much more rewarding than, some other type of job. Um, Although I did do a little different from, I think, the average teaching. Uh, I taught a lot of graduate students the methods for research. So one other thing is I really enjoy research. And in fact, I got my undergraduate degree in chemistry and fully intended to spend a life in a lab away from all people on Earth and enjoying life. But in the end, I was exposed to almost every graduate student at UCLA one way or another, and really enjoyed that. And all. The other thing about it, just now that I've pretty much at the end of my career in teaching, is I have a number of students that keep in touch with me, even from 20 years ago, and it's uh, it's almost self-fulfilling to have a student who you run across or who lets you know they're doing well and how well they've progressed in their career. It's almost like, well, that's part of my success or a lot of my
Right.
success.
Right.
So it's not just the teaching, regurgitating a bunch of facts and things like that. Um, I think what really is interesting is quickly when you're teaching, you realize that you're molding people into productive whatever they're going to be. I always call it warping their minds. Um, and that's, I think, really important because when I teach, I oftentimes, like right now, my class has 29 students in it, which is a pretty good class size for graduate students. And
Yeah.
so I only have now master's and PhD candidates, but 29 in
That's
one
big.
room teaching
Yeah.
them uh, is it's a challenge. But what I do the first, we at UCLA we're on 10-week quarters, so we're not on a semester system. So what I do is actually look them up to see what school they're in, where they may be in the public health school or medical school, public policy, nursing school. I look up what school they're in, and it's probably not allowed in K through 12, but you kind of know what their family background is just from, where they're coming from and all.
Right.
And I try and figure out where they're coming, basically where they're coming from, and start directing the teaching toward these individuals that have all these different interests. And I noticed, and even I realized when I was like in high school and all, I noticed that I learned things that I was interested in and I learned stuff that I felt like even like at 16 years old would be useful some way or other.
Right.
And otherwise, I laboriously learned, calculus and stuff like that. Although I like calculus.
Yeah.
Um, so I try and pick these students out and adjust to what basically they looks like their career is going to be. And that's probably a privilege of working in a university setting with limited students. And so I enjoy it. I enjoy basically now, now the generation I'm teaching is two generations behind me, but I enjoy the intergenerational interaction. Um, for example, when I was a kid, I was a real Mad Magazine uh, fanatic. I collected them, and I was talking about right now. I'm teaching emergency public health, which would be like COVID or what to do when an earthquake hits or storms. What are the public health issues? Like clean water and all. So I was telling this classroom of 29 students that you need to have a go bag. Particularly if you're you know away from home, like at work and all, you need a go bag there. You need a go bag at home. And a go bag is a bag where you keep your important papers like your birth certificate and passport and all. Um, and usually it should be fireproof and waterproof. Um, and if you're driving or something, you want to have extra water and
Right.
food, some power bars and medication if you're on medication. So I was talking about these go bags and going through it, and that's an important public health message to the community. And as a joke, I said, so I have two go bags. I have my go bag with some medicine in it and my important papers at home. I have this go bag. And I also have a whole go bag of all my Mad Magazine collection. And they all just looked at me like, and I'm like, do you guys know what Mad Magazine is? And they all looked at me like, I said, you need to go on YouTube and punch in Mad Magazine. There's all sorts of strips from Mad Magazine in there. But that gives you an example of the generation separation between my generation and even in earlier in my career when it was just the generation behind me. Um, you you learn a lot. You know, you teach the essentials like you need a go bag, but bounced back to you is you start to learn that uh, all these interesting things about life, this Mad magazine that we all treasured is just nobody knows, it's
Yeah.
non-existent. And unless you kept them, they're gone.
Yeah.
And and I think it's the same with a lot of other things. We at the School of Public Health, we have a whole variety of different professors, and so as you develop your teaching, you also, excuse me, just a second, let me, this is not whiskey. As you as you teach, even I believe with my mom when she was teaching in grade school, you develop your own personality.
Yeah.
The students look at you with a personality. So originally, I had a full head of black hair and just a mustache, and I was really good looking. Um, and I had a personality then. The just the your personal appearance, no matter where you're at teaching, elicits a different response from students. And now that I'm my I don't know what happened to my black hair and all, but it's gone, and I've dropped some weight from when I used to exercise and do weightlifting and all. And the students just look at me as a old man who's their father, something like that. So one thing you also learn in teaching is it's not just the generational gap, but you learn how to communicate and really get your mind and another generation's mind on a track. And then you start teaching. And what do you teach? You teach the curriculum, but
Right.
along the way you teach, well, this is really important to know because, and you explain either whether it's through a life experience or some other source that you really need to know this. You really need to know to have a go bag, using that as an example. And so it's almost like, um, at least for me, it's almost like at the end of the quarter when I'll have a few that drop, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when you have the ones that made it through your class and were really engaged, they're almost like your sons and daughters. You feel like they're your children. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So, are you teaching in like a practicum or are you teaching in a lecture room? Um,
Oh, good question. So both.
okay.
I teach what I'm talking about now is teaching in a lecture room. But within the lecture room, like we're talking about public health emergencies, we break into four small groups and they do exercises, sort of like a practicum.
Right.
But in the School of Medicine, or when I have a graduate student, we're actually right in the thick of what's going on. So it's reality,
Yeah. And
and not
and
as
and
exciting as. Go ahead.
that's different than studying the book. A lot of times you'll have a curriculum you've learned, like chemistry, in an undergraduate program. And you'll have ideas about how things work in the world. And then when you go out in the world, does it change the experience? Do you suddenly get more insight from that?
I think so. Yeah. If I had been stayed in chemistry, I really liked what's called inorganic chemistry. So I studied biochemistry and all these things, but um, I think in the real world, which has happened to me with medicine and public health, I would begin to focus and learn things about, let's say, inorganic chemistry that uh, I wasn't in the books. But I think a really good example is early on when I was teaching a student, and this is in the hospital, a medical student, a mother, and she was Latino, and most of us spoke what we call street Spanish. But
Right.
this mother brought her. It was yeah, it was actually about a 4 or 5 month old infant into the emergency room and kept told the staff, when they come in to register, uh, my baby's wrong. Something's wrong with my baby. She couldn't quite put it into English words, and the the staff in it's called triage looked at the baby, and the baby looked like it was just kind of sleepy, but looked normal, and so they kind of had the lady wait a little bit because I work in what are these LA hospitals that are trauma centers and all. Um, and they brought the baby back after about 30 minutes and put the baby into what we call a pediatric room. And I took the resident with me. It was basically an intern, and I'd been doing emergency medicine for a long time. And I walked in, I talked to the mother, and she could not put into words what was wrong. But I had consistently for years taught that if a mother if a mother says there's something wrong with her child medically, if I can use the word, damn well better pay attention, because there's this extra interaction between a child and a mother. It's almost mystical, this instinct between the two. And the resident, they're right out of medical school where they've been doing all the book training and everything you're talking about. And the resident looks at me, and when I say, there's something wrong with this baby, the mother is never wrong. The resident looks at me kind of almost like smirkingly, like, oh, this, some more, uh, opinion, no science behind this at all or anything. And so I begin to examine the baby with the resident, the R1 or intern. They're called R1s now. And immediately I had this smell. It did not smell like a baby. And if you think about it, if you're around infants, as long as they don't have a dirty diaper, they all have this incredibly pleasant smell to humans, to adults and all. And this baby smelled like kind of, I guess the best term is acrid, a little acidic. I don't know how to say it. And I said, this is, I immediately went nuts because this smell I'd smelled before. And it never did turn out well. And I immediately had that kid moved into one of our major critical rooms. And within really about 30 minutes, the baby started getting bruises under its skin, or ecchymoses, where the blood leaked out. And it turned out it had meningococcal, the same thing that causes meningitis in older people, septicemia. So it was really sick. But
Sick, very sick, very sick.
yeah, but we were on top of it because the mother said there's something wrong with my baby, even though the baby looked fine. And I remember as a little girl, cute as could be, and the smell, which nobody tells you about in a book, was a dead giveaway that we've got bad stuff going on. So yeah, the books are great, but you need to add in your own experiences. Like even I remember my daughter in high school. One of the teachers was talking about it was a math class, and the teacher was talking about how to quickly add if you're in a grocery store and you only have $20 or $40. how to quickly add numbers so that you can get an estimate of whether you're over your $40 budget. And it was basically, really rounding numbers off to tens and fives. And I, I remember Jennifer, my daughter, telling me about that. And I'm like, parent, why didn't I ever think of that? But then you realize it's just, in the course of what you're teaching in the book, you teach practical stuff that people cannot or don't put in books. I'm
Right.
real skeptical. I'm skeptical about textbook writers, although I have one on my desk right now. I'm writing a chapter for, but uh,
Well,
yeah,
the problem, of course, the anytime you're writing, and you've written a lot, you've had a lot of published articles, you've participated in a lot of research. Um,
yeah,
you can write something, but it doesn't necessarily, it can't cover absolutely everything. There are going to be elements that you have to focus on because that's the thesis of the work. That's what you have to focus on. And so you can't necessarily address every vicissitude of possibility in your
oh
writing.
yeah, oh very much, yeah, correct,
So yeah, one of the things that because I do teach adults, not I'm not paid to, but I teach adult writers. And one of the great things about adults that are writers is they want to know.
yeah,
Like they
oh
want to
yes,
know. They can be like you were talking about the intern having a smirk on his face like I'm very smart and I doubt your I
yeah,
doubt your
exactly,
supposition.
exactly,
Um, if they can have that smirk on their face, but even with the smirk, they still want to know. There's still something in them that is innately cooperative and acquisitive. And
yes,
it's because they're past that teen I resist you all the time for every reason. They're just past it. And so you're not really spending time with motivation. You're spending time with this is what you need to know and this is what will help you get the job done.
yeah. No, I totally agree. So there are different types of students that I even deal with who are, you know, uh, medical students and PhD, all these different students. So I'll have a class, let's say my class now, let's say there are 30 in the class. I'll have probably five that are just incredibly enthusiastic. And then another 10 that are interested and kind of enjoy learning what they're being taught. Whether, they want to hear all my stories and all is up to them. And then there's 10 more that are basically uh, preoccupied with something going on outside, some issue in their life. So they're there, but they're having trouble engaging. And then there's five that are in the class just to get the units, just to move on
Right.
um, and get a diploma. So what I try and do is identify the bottom five as quick as possible. Um, because even the way they look at me when I'm talking or explaining things and all is distracting. So I try and ignore them. And because they're not motivated, like you were talking about. And then the ones that are motivated, I don't worry about. It's that group in between that I want to motivate. And if I can move some of them up the motivation scale, then that's a huge success because that means they've become sort of, how do you put it, ambivalent from ambivalent about the subject to, oh, I'm excited now. I want to learn
Right.
this stuff. And when you see that transition, you think, man, I'm getting good or something like that. But it's such a feeling of success to motivate people to learn what originally they're kind of ambivalent about. And yeah, I remember uh, when I was in training, medical training, and then also I got it. I was in graduate school as well as medical school at one point in time. I remember occasional times where went in and thought, guy, I wonder how I can really quickly get through this class or this subject. Um, so I, go online and look for crib notes and all that kind of stuff, and yeah, be doing okay, getting a decent grade, and kind of relax. And then once the teacher sort of had some way of I don't know what it was, and I see it with myself, had some way of connecting with me, intellectually. All of a sudden, I couldn't get enough of what the material was. I wanted to know
Right.
more and more. So when that happens in a class with all these mixed, if you will, motivations, it's really pleasing. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. So you've mentioned your mom
yeah,
and the fact that you come from actually two teachers. Your dad was a coach and a teacher too.
yes.
S- Do you remember a lesson from them? Maybe not a classroom lesson, but a life lesson from either one of them that has stood out with you, that has stayed with you.
Yeah, well, I remember my dad, and I was 12 when he passed away, but I remember he was a basketball coach and also taught uh, PE. And then he also was real interested in other topics, like history and things like that. But I remember him basically he would throw out a question and I went with him to some of his classroom sessions and all, and he'd throw out a question, something like, "What's the best way to maintain a healthy heart?" He'd be teaching health, really, although they called it, I forget what they called it in high school, but it was similar to that. And the he had in his mind what was important, but the students would all look blankly at him, and he'd say, "Well, what do you think about physical activity? Is that important for your health?" And a couple of them would shake their head, and then he would start pushing them into getting engaged with what his question was. And finally, somebody would say, "Well, a good diet or lots of sleep, plenty of sleep." And he'd get all excited and thank them and say, that is so great, and all that. And he would just pull people in. And I don't think they really realized what was happening. They would all of a sudden start the discussion going and rolling. And some would come up with questions. Um, this is just off the top of my head, are tortillas as bad as bread, or are they the same? Are they good? And he always would look up at the ceiling when somebody hit him with a question that was hard and say, "I don't know, but I'm going to look that up and I'll let you know when we meet again." So it's just, uh, that was the most impressive thing about my dad that I remember. And with my mom, she was teaching fifth graders. So, and I, by that time, was in middle school or junior high, whatever you want to call it, in high school. So I wasn't around much, but I remember um, her talking about her interactions with school administration and things like that. And yeah, now I would think, yeah, I'm not real enthusiastic about some of the administrators I've run across over my career, but she would always try and cooperate and make suggestions. And even though they were jerks, be positive. So I learned that from her, that, administrators' jobs are worse than teaching. Well, I don't even think teaching is a bad job. It's almost like a hobby. But I can't imagine being an administrator over all these different teachers and students in the whole program, because you're dealing with thousands of personalities. And,
Yeah.
what my issue may not be somebody else's major issue, and the administrator has to work with that. So with my mom, I learned to work with, the chairman of my department, or I was vice chair of emergency medicine at one of the UCLA hospitals, and I learned to work with the hospital administration. And when they would tell me something that I would have thought, I don't think that's important for me to, pound into the head of all my staff and everything. I'd stop for a second and think, now, why are they telling me that? And sometimes it was just political. And I would realize that somewhere or other, this has been made important enough to dribble down to somebody who can do something about it. And so I would pay attention and also I would try and figure out. So working in, I think, almost any education system, my mom taught me to work with the administrators, not to combat them. And um, I think, well, right in today's world, there's a lot of friction between administrators and teachers and researchers and all. It seems like it's going on. I'm sure there are people that'll watch this who are not in the United States, but it's going on through the United States all over the place now. It doesn't have to just be education.
Right. And you know what, Sammy, I think that one of the things that is very encouraging to me by what you're saying is that underneath it all, underneath the fighting that's superficial and on social media, maybe more than it is in actual person to person contact.
Correct. Yeah.
Um, I think that idea of cooperating, working together to get a job done still matters to almost everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you talking about public health, so many of us worldwide have ended up in these situations where you have to have your emergency preparedness. You have to face an emergency. And
Yeah.
that's when we have to cooperate. We have to set aside our personal grinds, our personal axes, and cooperate and
Yeah.
learn to cooperate. And I have to tell you, I really appreciate knowing that that's still right at the top of what people are learning to do, even in graduate school.
Yeah.
How to
Yeah.
cooperate, how to work together, how to work as a team, and how to address a problem. Because,
Yeah. It's communication skills, not using trigger words. And one thing that's I think, real important, and this is super important in teaching, is getting into the mind of others. So why is this, if I were in teaching high school, why is this kid showing up to school um, dirty, obnoxious, smoking cigarettes out on outside the building, rather than being judging, well, this is a violent criminal in the making. The question is, why is this kid doing this?
yeah,
What's happening? Um, and there may not be much you can do about it, but at least if you understand that there's maybe this kid's in a totally bad home situation or lonely and hooked up with a gang and things like that, then at least you relax, and it makes communication easier.
that's a perfect note to end on. And look at this. You talked for half an hour. Was it painful?
Yes.
Well, I just thank you so much for doing this. I don't know if you've seen the channel, but part
Yeah.
of part of why I wanted to do it was I had always thought that John and I were going to have like a podcast or something when he retired. And since that's not going to happen, this is kind of my way of connecting to that feeling. And it's nice. I've now got these interviews with family members that are now saved and they'll be available to us and we can look at them and talk about them. And I really appreciate you doing this.
No, I
So,
enjoyed it.
so when it comes up online, I'll send you the link and you can take a look at
Okay, great. Appreciate
it.
it.
And I
Have a
look
good
forward to
day.
seeing you again